In this week's lectures, I'm going to continue talking about how the social forces that I discussed at the beginning of the semester impact our lives and our understandings of our own and others' gender and sexuality. Socialization is very important to these processes. And to understand socialization, we need to take two concepts, one of which we're already familiar with, and the other which might be new. Norms, as we all now know, are the rules that make up and govern social behavior in our society. What we consider to be normal, what we expect from ourselves and what we expect from each other. Ideology refers to sets of common sense beliefs about what it means to be and exist in our world and in our community. Together, ideology and norms are important components of socialization, which refers to the process through which people learn about norms and ideologies dominant in their society. It's how we learn how to behave, and how we learn how to expect others to behave, and what they will in turn expect from us. We talk about socialization quite often with children. However, the concept of socialization is not only for children. Rather, socialization is a constant and lifelong process that continues to impact us all well after we've grown up. We are all embedded in the center of several different sites of socialization. Each site has its own rules, written and unwritten, and its own expectations for behavior. If you'll recall the first week of lectures, I discussed culture as a web of influence. Socialization and society are very similar. You exist at the center of your own web of influence, through which you are socialized, but you are also a socializer, or an agent of socialization for others. You may have an influence on younger members of your family, on your peers, on your classmates, on those that you work with. You learn rules and expectations of behavior from people in those places, and they learn them from you. Gender socialization refers to the process through which we learn about gender norms and about the expectations for gender roles in our society. Like other types of socialization, gender socialization begins from birth. A couple of weeks ago in our class meeting, I discussed how when a doctor, nurse, or midwife examines a blood test, a sonogram, or looks down at a newborn baby and declares it's a boy or it's a girl, they're not simply referring to genetics or genitals in that moment. That declaration, it's a boy, it's a girl, is, if not the first, at least an early part of that child's gender socialization. Every child learns what gender means in their society. They learn about their expected place and role in the normative gender expectations of that society, and they learn the benefits and consequences of either meeting or defying those expectations. These are lessons that we continue to learn throughout our lives. I can recall once when I was in 3rd or 4th grade sharing with some of my friends who were also girls that I liked Power Rangers. And I was immediately told that this was not an acceptable show or toy to like because those were boy things. And so I was told I shouldn't or couldn't like Power Rangers. This interaction was an example of gender socialization, and it's one that I still remember today. We each have thousands, if not millions, of experiences like this throughout our lives that set up the parameters of what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. By meeting and keeping to the expectations set up by our society, we can accrue or collect cultural capital. Cultural capital is another fancy French philosophical term for the non-financial assets that help people succeed in the world. For example, if your understanding of your own gender matches what that doctor, nurse, or midwife told your parents 17 or 18 years ago, you likely have more cultural capital than those whose identity does not match that declaration. Cisgender people often, though not always, have a much easier time adhering to the rules, expectations, and gender norms they learn through gender socialization. People who don't or can't live up to these social expectations often face social censure, which may involve expressions of disapproval or rejection as a consequence for violating cultural norms. As I mentioned earlier, each of these sites of socialization has its own rules, expectations, and norms that you learn through interactions with other people in each site, and that you may go on to teach others. However, those rules, expectations, and norms are not the same from place to place. When you interact with your family or with a teacher at school, you probably speak differently, act differently, and have different expectations than you do when you talk with a professor or with a stranger. Code switching is a way of talking about these changes in behavior and expectation as you move from one social setting to another. We are all products of our ongoing socialization and the social forces that shape the ways that we think, act, and behave, and the ways that we expect others to act, think, and behave. Your course materials this week include 2 chapters in Roxane Gay's book, Bad Feminist, one of which closes with this quote: "We must stop pointing to the exception, these bright shining stars that transcend circumstance, that transcend processes of socialization. We must look at how we can best support the least among us, not spend our time blindly revering and trying to mimic the greatest without demanding systemic change." Socialization is a necessary and important part of our societies. However, much like with categories, rigid adherence to socialization will inevitably create inequalities and systems of disadvantage.